The necklace glinted in the dim light of our bedroom, its delicate silver chain coiled like a serpent on my palm. I stared at it, my heart pounding, as the implications of its presence under our bed sank in. This wasn't mine. It wasn't Amy's. There was only one explanation, and it made me sick to my stomach. "Mommy, can we have ice cream?" Amy's voice floated up from downstairs, snapping me back to reality. I quickly shoved the necklace into my pocket. "Just a minute, sweetie," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. As I made my way downstairs, I could hear Doug in the kitchen, his laptop keys clicking away. He barely looked up as I entered. "Hey, can you grab Amy some ice cream?" "I'm in the middle of this proposal," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to confront him right then and there. "Sure," I managed, opening the freezer. "Amy, come get your ice cream." Our 3-year-old came bounding in, pigtails bouncing. "Yay! Thanks, Mommy." As I scooped the ice cream, I watched Doug out of the corner of my eye. He seemed so normal, so unaffected. How could he sit there, acting like everything was fine, when there was clear evidence of his betrayal burning a hole in my pocket? "Doug, we need to talk," I said, my voice low and tense. He finally looked up, his brow furrowing. "Can it wait? I'm really swamped with this freelance gig." "No, it can't," I snapped, louder than I intended. Amy looked up from her ice cream, her eyes wide. Doug sighed, closing his laptop. "All right, what's so urgent?" I glanced at Amy, then back at him. "Not here. Upstairs. Now." He followed me reluctantly, leaving Amy to her dessert. As soon as we were in our bedroom, I whirled on him. "Want to explain this?" I hissed, pulling out the necklace. Doug's face paled, but he quickly composed himself. "Where did you find that?" "Under our bed. Care to tell me who it belongs to?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I knew all too well. "Mel, it's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I cut him off. "Because what I think is that you're cheating on me. Am I wrong?" "Of course you're wrong," he exclaimed, his voice rising. "How could you even think that?" I laughed bitterly. "How could I not? You've been distant for months, always working on your laptop, and now this." I dangled the necklace in front of him. "Don't lie to me, Doug." He reached for the necklace, but I snatched it away. It's a gift," he stammered. "For you, for our anniversary next month." I was hiding it. I stared at him, incredulous. "Our anniversary isn't for another 3 months, Doug, and this isn't my style. You know that." His face fell, caught in the lie. "Mel, please, it's not." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just don't. I can't believe you do this to us, to Amy." As if on cue, Amy's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Mommy? Daddy, where are you?" Doug moved towards the door, but I blocked his path. "We're not done here," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, exasperated. "The truth would be nice," I spat. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, seeing a text from Sophie, my mother. "Everything okay, dear? You seemed off when we talked earlier." I looked back at Doug, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance. In that moment, I made a decision. "This isn't over," I told him, pocketing the necklace. "But right now, our daughter needs us. We'll finish this later." As I brushed past him to go downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had just changed irrevocably. The necklace weighed heavy in my pocket, a tangible reminder of the betrayal that threatened to tear our family apart. But as I plastered on a smile for Amy, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. The playgroup bustled with activity as I dropped Amy off, my eyes scanning the room for Lucy. She stood in the corner, her blonde hair perfectly styled, laughing with another parent. My stomach churned at the sight of her. "Melissa, good morning," Lucy chirped, waving me over. I plastered on a smile and approached, Amy clinging to my leg. "Morning, Lucy," I replied, my voice tight. "Amy, sweetie, why don't you go play with your friends?" As Amy scampered off, Lucy leaned in conspiratorially. "I'm so glad you're here early. I wanted to chat about the upcoming parent-teacher meetings." I nodded, barely listening as she prattled on about schedules. My eyes were drawn to her neck, where a familiar silver chain glinted. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. "Lucy," I interrupted, my voice trembling, "that's a beautiful necklace. Where did you get it?" She touched it, smiling. "Oh, this old thing. It was a gift from a friend." The room spun. I gripped the nearest table to steady myself. "A friend?" Lucy's smile faltered for a moment. "Yes, just a friend. Is everything okay, Melissa? You look pale." I forced a laugh. "I'm fine. Just tired, Listen, I've got to run. Work calls. I practically fled the playgroup, my mind racing. The necklace, Lucy, Doug, it all made horrible sense now. The day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus at work, my thoughts consumed by what I'd seen. By the time I picked up Amy and headed home, I was a bundle of nerves. Doug was already there when we arrived, playing with his phone on the couch. He looked up, smiling. Hey, how was your day? I ignored him, turning to Amy. Sweetie, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy and Daddy need to talk. Once Amy was upstairs, I rounded on Doug. I saw Lucy today, I said, my voice low and dangerous. He frowned. Okay? And? She was wearing the necklace, Doug, the one I found under our bed. The color drained from his face. Mel, I can explain. Don't you dare, I hissed. How long has this been going on? How could you do this to us? Doug stood, reaching for me. It's not what you think. Lucy and I were just what? I spat. Friends? Is that why you're giving her jewelry? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. It's complicated, Mel. I've been going through some things. Oh, spare me, I interrupted. What about what I've been going through, working full-time, taking care of Amy, supporting your decision to freelance? And this is how you repay me? Doug's face hardened. Maybe if you weren't so focused on work all the time, you'd see what's really going on. I recoiled as if slapped. Are you seriously blaming me for your affair? It's not an affair, he shouted, then lowered his voice, glancing towards Amy's room. Lucy understands me. She listens. Tears stung my eyes. And I don't? Is that what you're saying? Before he could answer, my phone rang. It was Sophie, my mother. I answered, turning away from Doug. Mom, now's not a good time, I said, my voice shaky. Honey, what's wrong? Sophie asked, concern evident in her voice. I took a deep breath, glancing at Doug. He was watching me, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance. Everything, I whispered into the phone. Can you come over? I need you. As I hung up, Doug stepped towards me. Mel, please, let's talk about this. I held up a hand, stopping him. No, I'm done talking. My mother's coming over, and you're going to leave. I can't even look at you right now. He opened his mouth to protest, but something in my expression must have stopped him. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. How had we come to this? And more importantly, what was I going to do now? The front door creaked open, and I hastily wiped my tears away. Sophie rushed in, her face etched with concern. Melissa, honey, what's going on? She enveloped me in a hug, and I crumbled against her. It's Doug, I choked out. He's having an affair. Sophie stiffened. That no-good son of a... She caught herself, glancing towards Amy's room. Are you sure? I nodded, recounting the necklace incident and my confrontation with Doug. Sophie's face darkened with each word. I'll kill him, she muttered. Mom, please, I sighed. I need to figure out what to do next. Before she could respond, the front door opened again. Doug strode in, his jaw set. I thought I told you to leave, I hissed. This is my house too, Mel, he retorted. We need to talk. Sophie stepped between us. You've got some nerve, Doug. He ignored her, focusing on me. Melissa, please, let me explain. Explain what? I snapped. How you've been lying to me, sneaking around with Amy's teacher? Doug's face flushed. It's not like that. Lucy and I, we connected. She understands the pressure I'm under. I laughed bitterly. Oh, the pressure you're under? What about me, Doug? I've been carrying this family while you chase your freelance dreams. That's not fair, he shot back. I'm trying to build something for us, for Amy's future. By sleeping with her teacher? Sophie interjected. Doug whirled on her. This doesn't concern you, Sophie. The hell it doesn't, she growled. That's my daughter and granddaughter you're hurting. I held up a hand, silencing them both. Doug, I want you out, tonight. His eyes widened. Mel, come on, we can work this out. Work what out? I asked, my voice trembling. The trust you've shattered, the family you've torn apart. Doug's shoulders sagged. I never meant to hurt you, it just happened. Things like this don't just happen, I spat. You made a choice. Now I'm making mine. A small voice interrupted us. Mommy? Daddy? We all turned to see Amy at the foot of the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide with fear. Why is everyone yelling? She whimpered. I rushed to her, scooping her up. It's okay, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy were just having a grown-up talk. Doug approached us, reaching for Amy. I instinctively pulled back. Don't, I warned. His face crumpled. Mel, please. She's my daughter, too. Sophie stepped in, gently taking Amy from me. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go make some hot chocolate while Mommy and Daddy finish talking. As they disappeared into the kitchen, I turned back to Doug. I want you gone by morning. You can see Amy, but it'll be on my terms. You can't do this, he protested. We need to think about what's best for Amy. I am thinking about Amy, I retorted. She deserves better than a father who lies and cheats. Doug's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, I'll go, but this isn't over, Melissa. As he stormed upstairs to pack, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. How had we come to this? The man I'd loved, the father of my child, was now a stranger to me. Sophie returned, sitting beside me. He's leaving? I nodded, unable to speak. She squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing, honey. It'll be hard, but you're strong. You'll get through this. I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face. What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough? Sophie's eyes flashed with determination. Then I'll be strong for you. We'll face this together, Melissa. You're not alone. As Doug's footsteps echoed above us, packing his life into suitcases, I clung to my mother's words. I wasn't alone, and somehow, someway, I would find the strength to rebuild my life, for myself and for Amy. The house felt emptier without Doug, but I couldn't decide if that was a good or bad thing. Amy kept asking where Daddy was, and each time my heart broke a little more. I'd told her he was on a work trip, but I knew that excuse wouldn't hold for long. One afternoon, while Amy napped, I found myself drawn to Doug's home office. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the knob. Did I really want to do this, to invade his privacy? But then I remembered the necklace, Lucy's smug face, and my resolve hardened. The room was a mess, papers strewn everywhere. I started with his desk drawers, rifling through documents and old receipts, nothing incriminating. His laptop sat on the desk, tempting me. I knew his password, or at least I thought I did. To my surprise, it worked. As I scrolled through his emails, my stomach churned. There were dozens of messages from Lucy, each more intimate than the last. They detailed meetups, shared jokes, and plans for the future. My future. Our future. I felt sick, but it was a folder labeled Melissa that caught my eye. With trembling hands, I clicked it open. Inside were screenshots of text messages, our text messages. Every argument, every cold exchange meticulously documented, and below them, notes. Melissa overreacting again. Another late night at work. Does she even care about this family? Tears blurred my vision. How long had he been planning this? Documenting our downfall? A noise from the hallway made me jump. I quickly closed the laptop, my heart racing. It was just Amy, stirring in her sleep. I slumped back in the chair, overwhelmed. I had my evidence now, but at what cost? The Doug I knew, the man I married, was truly gone. My phone buzzed. A text from Doug. Can we talk? I miss Amy. I ignored it, focusing instead on the laptop. I needed to document what I'd found before he had a chance to delete it all. With shaky hands, I began taking photos of the screen, capturing every damning email and note. As I worked, another text came through, this time from an unknown number. Hi, Melissa. It's Lucy. We need to talk about Doug. My blood boiled. The audacity of this woman. I typed out a scathing reply, then deleted it. No, I needed to be smarter than that. Instead, I wrote, Fine, meet me at Rosie's Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Her reply was almost immediate. I'll be there. I set the phone down, my mind racing. What could Lucy possibly have to say? Was this a trap? Or did she have information I needed? As if on cue, Amy's voice called out from her room. Mommy? Where's Daddy? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. How much longer could I keep this charade up? How much longer should I? I went to Amy's room, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her innocent eyes looked up at me, full of trust and love. In that moment, I made a decision. Sweetie, I said softly, Daddy and Mommy are going through some grown-up problems right now, but I want you to know that we both love you very, very much. Amy's lower lip trembled. Is Daddy coming home? I pulled her close, fighting back tears. I don't know, baby, but no matter what happens, I promise I'll always be here for you. As I held my daughter, I steeled myself for what was to come. The meeting with Lucy, the inevitable confrontation with Doug, the painful process of untangling our lives. It wouldn't be easy, but looking at Amy, I knew it was necessary. Tomorrow, I'd face Lucy and whatever revelations she brought. But tonight I'd hold my daughter and find strength in her love. Because no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I'd fight with everything I had to protect our future, with or without Doug. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as I sipped my coffee, steeling myself for the day ahead. Amy was at preschool, and I had a mountain of work to tackle before my meeting with Lucy. The thought of facing her made my stomach churn, but I was determined to get answers. My phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Frowning, I answered. "Hello, is this Melissa Thompson?" a stern voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Thompson, this is Officer Jenkins from the City Police Department. I'm calling about your husband, Douglas Thompson." My heart stopped. "What about Doug? Is he okay?" There was a pause, heavy with unspoken dread. "There's been an accident, ma'am. Your husband's car collided with another vehicle on Highway 16. He's been taken to Memorial Hospital." The room spun. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Is he alive?" "Yes, ma'am, but his condition is critical. You should get to the hospital as soon as possible." I mumbled a thank you and hung up, my mind reeling. Doug, accident, hospital. The words swirled in my head, refusing to make sense. With shaking hands, I dialed Sophie. "Mom," I choked out when she answered. "I need you to pick up Amy from preschool. Doug's been in an accident." "Oh, honey," she gasped. "I'm on my way. Go to the hospital. I'll take care of Amy." The drive to Memorial was a blur. I parked haphazardly, rushing through the emergency room doors. A harried nurse directed me to the ICU waiting area, where a grim-faced doctor approached me. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "Your husband is in surgery. He suffered severe internal injuries and a head trauma. The next 24 hours will be critical." I collapsed into a chair, my legs no longer able to support me. Will he make it?" The doctor's face softened. "We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility." His voice faded as I spotted a familiar figure down the hall. Blonde hair, tear-streaked face, a bandage on her forehead. Lucy. Rage surged through me, momentarily displacing my fear. I stood, marching towards her. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Lucy's eyes widened in panic. "Melissa, I can explain." "Explain what?" I hissed. "Why you're here? Why my husband is fighting for his life?" She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was in the car with Doug. We were going to tell you everything today." The world tilted on its axis. "You were in the car? You caused this?" "No," she cried. "It wasn't our fault. A truck ran a red light. Doug, he swerved to protect me." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Even in crisis, Doug had chosen her. A nurse approached, eyeing us warily. "Miss Ellison, we need to check your concussion." I watched, numb, as Lucy was led away. She glanced back, her eyes pleading, but I turned away. I couldn't deal with her. Not now. Hours passed in a haze of coffee and hushed conversations. Sophie arrived, squeezing my hand and murmuring comforting words I couldn't process. All I could think about was Doug, lying on an operating table, his life hanging by a thread. Finally, the surgeon emerged, his face grave. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband is out of surgery. He's stable, but—" I braced myself for the worst. "There's been significant brain damage. We won't know the full extent until he wakes up. If he wakes up." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. "If he wakes up." The words echoed in my head, a cruel taunt of what might never be. "Can I see him?" I whispered. The doctor nodded, leading me to Doug's room. I gasped at the sight of him, pale and still, surrounded by beeping machines. This broken man couldn't be my Doug, the father of my child, the center of my world for so long. As I sank into the chair beside his bed, taking his limp hand in mine, I was hit by a staggering realization. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the pain he'd caused, I wasn't ready to let him go. Not like this. In that sterile hospital room, watching Doug's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, I made a decision. Whatever happened next, whether he lived or died, I would face it head on. For Amy, for myself, and yes, even for Doug. Because some bonds, no matter how frayed, are too strong to break completely. The hospital corridor seemed endless as I made my way to Doug's room. It had been 3 days since the accident, and he'd finally regained consciousness. My emotions were a tangled mess of relief, anger, and dread. As I approached his room, I heard voices. One was Doug's, weak but unmistakable. The other was Lucy's. My blood boiled. I burst through the door, startling them both. Lucy jumped away from Doug's bedside, guilt written all over her face. "Melissa," Doug croaked, his eyes widening, "I can explain." "Save it," I snapped. I turned to Lucy. "Get out, now." She hesitated, looking at Doug. He nodded slightly, and she scurried past me, avoiding eye contact. Once we were alone, I faced my husband. He looked small and broken in the hospital bed, but I steeled my heart against pity. "How long?" I demanded. Doug closed his eyes, sighing. 6 months. The admission hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. Why? My voice cracked. Why her? Why throw away our family? He struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. I didn't mean for it to happen. Lucy, she understood me, made me feel alive again. And I didn't? Tears stung my eyes. What about Amy? Did you think about her at all? Guilt flashed across his face. Of course I did. I love Amy more than anything. Not enough to stay faithful to her mother, I spat. Doug reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Mel, please. I know I messed up, but this accident, it's made me realize what's truly important. I want to make things right. I laughed bitterly. Make things right? Doug, you were in that car with her. You were going to leave us. He shook his head vehemently. No, we were coming to talk to you, to confess everything. How noble of you, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. And now what? You expect me to forgive and forget? Doug's face crumpled. I'm asking for a chance, for Amy's sake, if nothing else. The mention of our daughter sent a fresh wave of pain through me. How would I explain this to her? A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Doug's doctor. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, he greeted us solemnly. I have your latest test results. The atmosphere in the room shifted, tension crackling in the air. The head trauma has caused some complications, the doctor explained. There's a high probability of long-term cognitive and motor function impairment. The words hung heavy between us. Doug would need extensive care and rehabilitation. The implications were staggering. As the doctor continued explaining the prognosis, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Despite everything, Doug was still Amy's father. Could I really walk away now? But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the secret meetings with Lucy. The life we'd built together was already in ruins. Did I owe him anything more? The doctor left, and silence fell over the room. Doug looked at me, his eyes pleading. Melissa, he whispered, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you, don't give up on us. I stood there, torn between fury and compassion, between the vows we'd made and the trust he'd shattered. The future I'd imagined for us lay in pieces, and I had no idea how to put it back together, or if I even wanted to. I can't do this right now, I said finally, my voice trembling. I need time to think. As I turned to leave, Doug called out, Mel, wait, what about Amy? What do we tell her? I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. Without looking back, I replied, I'll figure it out, like I always do. Stepping into the hallway, I leaned against the wall, my legs weak. The enormity of the situation crashed over me. In a matter of days, my life had been turned upside down. Now I faced an impossible choice: stay and try to rebuild what was broken, or walk away and start anew. As I made my way out of the hospital, one thought echoed in my mind. Whatever I decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The whispers started the moment I stepped into the grocery store. Eyes darted away when I looked up. Hushed conversations halted mid-sentence. News travels fast in a small town, and our scandal was the juiciest gossip in years. I grabbed a cart, trying to ignore the stares burning into my back. As I reached for a box of Amy's favorite cereal, a familiar voice made me freeze. Melissa? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I turned to face Linda, my next-door neighbor and longtime friend. Her eyes were filled with pity, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. It's fine, Linda, I muttered, attempting a smile. We're managing. She touched my arm, her voice lowering. If you need anything at all, just let me know. That Doug. I always thought he was too good to be true. I nodded, fighting back tears. Thanks, I appreciate it. As I hurried away, I overheard another shopper whisper, Can you believe it, with Amy's teacher of all people? My hands shook as I grabbed items off the shelves, desperate to finish and escape. But as I rounded the corner to the dairy aisle, I came face to face with Lucy. She looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she froze, terror flashing across her face. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then, something inside me snapped. How dare you show your face here? I hissed, advancing on her. Lucy backed away, hands raised. Melissa, please, I'm so sorry. Sorry? I laughed bitterly. You destroyed my family and you're sorry? By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching our confrontation with morbid fascination. Now, Lucy's eyes darted around, panicked. I never meant for any of this to happen. Doug and I. Don't you dare say his name, I spat. You have no right. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To Amy? Tears streamed down Lucy's face. I've lost everything too. My job, my reputation. Good, I snarled. You deserve to lose it all. Suddenly, Sophie appeared at my side, gently grasping my arm. Melissa, honey, let's go. This isn't the place. I shook her off, my rage building. No, Mom, she needs to hear this. Everyone needs to hear this. I turned to the gathered crowd, my voice rising. You want to know the truth? My husband, the man I trusted with my life, my future, betrayed me with this woman, Amy's teacher, and now he's lying in a hospital bed, broken and changed forever, because they were sneaking around behind my back. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Lucy looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Melissa, please. She whimpered. I'm leaving town. You'll never have to see me again. Running away? I sneered. Of course you are. That's what cowards do. Sophie tugged at my arm more insistently. That's enough, Melissa. Think of Amy. The mention of my daughter's name was like a bucket of cold water. I deflated, suddenly aware of the spectacle I'd created. You're right, I said quietly. Then to Lucy, go, leave, and pray I never see you again. As Lucy fled, leaving her cart abandoned, I turned to face the crowd. Their expressions ranged from shock to sympathy to poorly concealed excitement at the drama. Show's over, I announced, my voice cracking. Go back to your shopping. Sophie guided me out of the store, leaving our groceries behind. As we stepped into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was the hospital. Mrs. Thompson? Your husband is asking for you. There's been a complication. I closed my eyes, feeling the last threads of my composure unraveling. How much more could I take? Sophie squeezed my hand. What is it, honey? I looked at her, tears finally spilling over. It's Doug. I have to go back to the hospital. As we drove away from the store, leaving behind a wake of gossip and scandal, I realized I was at a crossroads. The life I knew was gone, shattered beyond repair. Now I had to decide. Would I let this break me, or would I find the strength to forge a new path for myself and Amy? With each mile that passed, my resolve hardened. Whatever happened next, I would face it head-on. For better or worse, this was my story now, and I was determined to write my own ending. The courtroom felt suffocating as I sat across from Doug, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. My own attorney, Sarah, squeezed my hand reassuringly. You've got this, Melissa, she murmured. Remember, we have all the evidence. He can't weasel out of this. I nodded, steeling myself as the judge entered. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, emotional turmoil, and sleepless nights. As the proceedings began, I found myself drifting, remembering the night everything changed. The necklace under the bed, the confrontation at the hospital, the scandal that rocked our small town. It felt like a lifetime ago. Doug's lawyer presented their case first, painting a picture of a remorseful husband, a victim of circumstance. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream out his lies. When it was our turn, Sarah methodically laid out the evidence. The emails, the text messages, the financial records showing Doug's secret expenditures on Lucy. With each revelation, I watched Doug shrink in his seat, the facade of confidence crumbling. Finally, the judge turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, do you have anything you'd like to add? I stood, my legs shaky but my voice strong. Your Honor, for years I believed in the sanctity of my marriage, in the man I thought Doug was, but that man doesn't exist. The real Doug betrayed not just me, but our daughter Amy. He risked everything, our family, our future, for a fleeting affair. I turned to face Doug directly, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice, for myself and for Amy. We deserve better than the lies and betrayal you've subjected us to, and now we're taking back our lives. As I sat down, a hush fell over the courtroom. The judge nodded solemnly, then delivered her verdict. The settlement was more than I dared hope for. Primary custody of Amy, a substantial alimony, and child support that would ensure Amy's future was secure. Doug's face crumpled as the judge detailed his visitation rights, supervised only, given his recent erratic behavior. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the legal victory, it was the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself, for Amy, for the life we deserved. Outside, Sophie was waiting with Amy. My daughter ran to me, and I scooped her up, holding her tight. "Mommy, why are you crying?" she asked, wiping a tear from my cheek. I smiled through the tears. "These are happy tears, sweetheart. Mommy just won a big game." Sophie hugged us both. "I'm so proud of you, Melissa. You've been so strong through all of this." As we walked to the car, I spotted Doug across the parking lot. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, but then he turned away, shoulders slumped, defeated. That night, after tucking Amy into bed, I sat on the porch swing, gazing at the stars. The future stretched out before me, uncertain, yes, but full of possibility. My phone buzzed with messages of support from friends and coworkers. The community that had once whispered behind my back now rallied around me. I'd emerged from the scandal not as a victim, but as a survivor. As I scrolled through the messages, I paused on one from Linda, my neighbor. "Melissa, you're an inspiration to all of us. If you ever want to share your story, let me know. It could help so many women." I considered her words a seed of an idea taking root. Perhaps there was a way to turn this pain into purpose, to help others facing similar battles. The porch door creaked open, and Sophie joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, clinking her glass against mine. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "To new beginnings," I echoed. As we sat in comfortable silence, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face it. I had survived the storm, emerged stronger, and now, with Amy by my side and a support system I never knew I had, I was ready to write the next chapter of our lives. On my own terms, with my head held high, the future was mine to shape, and I intended to make it a bright one. For myself, for Amy, and for any woman who needed to know that there was life and triumph after betrayal. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and reached for Jake. His side was empty, still made up from the night before. Right, he'd stayed at his parents' house to help with some renovations. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept towards the noise. "Jake?" I called out tentatively. "Is that you?" No answer. As I rounded the corner into our living room, I gasped. My mother-in-law, Martha, stood amid a sea of broken picture frames, family photos scattered across the hardwood floor. "Oh, Claire," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so sorry, dear. I was just trying to straighten these photos, and they all came tumbling down." I blinked, trying to process the scene. "Martha, it's 6 a.m. How did you get in?" She waved a key in the air. "Jake gave me a spare, in case of emergencies." "Of course he did." I bit back a sigh and forced a smile. "Well, let me help you clean this up." As we gathered the broken glass, I noticed Martha scrutinizing each photo. She'd looked at one of Jake and me on our honeymoon. "Oh, Claire, you really should have worn a hat. The sun's so aging on the skin." I gritted my teeth. "I'll keep that in mind for next time." The front door opened, and Jake walked in, looking surprised to see us. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Martha beamed. "Just helping Claire tidy up, sweetheart. You know how disorganized she can be." I opened my mouth to protest, but Jake cut in. "That's so thoughtful of you, Mom. Isn't that nice, Claire?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "Oh, shoot. Dad needs help with the drywall. I've got to run back." "But you just got here," I protested. "I thought we were having breakfast together." He kissed my cheek absently. "Rain check? Mom, you'll keep Claire company, right?" Before I could object, they were both gone, leaving me alone with the mess and a growing sense of unease. Later that afternoon, I visited my parents. Dad was having one of his good days, alert and chatty as we sat in their sunny kitchen. "How's married life treating you, Pumpkin?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. I hesitated. "It's an adjustment." Mom patted my hand. "That's normal, dear. Your father and I had our rough patches, too." Dad chuckled. "Remember when your mother thought I was having an affair with my secretary?" Mom swatted his arm playfully. "How was I supposed to know you were planning my surprise party?" Their easy banter made my heart ache. Would Jake and I ever have that? My phone buzzed with a text from Jake's sister, Sarah. "Family dinner at our place tonight. Don't be late." I showed it to my parents. Dad frowned. "Bit short notice, isn't it?" I shrugged. "That's Sarah for you." Mom squeezed my hand. "You go on, dear. We'll be fine here." As I drove to Jake's family home, my stomach churned with anxiety. These dinners always felt more like an inquisition than a family gathering. Martha answered the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Claire, darling, come in, come in. We were just talking about you." I stepped inside, the tension palpable. Jake, Sarah, and Thomas sat around the dining table, their conversation dying as I entered. Sarah's saccharine voice broke the silence. "So, Claire, when are you and Jake planning on giving us some grandchildren?" I froze, caught off guard. Jake looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Martha chimed in. "You're not getting any younger, dear. Tick-tock!" I felt my face flush as I struggled to find a response. This was going to be a long night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. I stared at my reflection in the bridal boutique's mirror, my heart sinking. The wedding dress I'd dreamed of since childhood hung limply on the rack, replaced by a monstrosity of tulle and sequins that Martha and Sarah had insisted upon. "Oh, Claire, you look absolutely divine," Martha cooed, clapping her hands together. Sarah circled me like a shark. "It's perfect. Jake will be speechless." I caught my mother's eye in the mirror. Edith's face was a mask of concern, but she remained silent. We both knew this wasn't the dress I wanted. "I'm not sure," I began, but Martha cut me off. "Nonsense. This is the one. We'll take it," she announced to the saleswoman. My stomach churned. "Wait, I haven't decided." "Claire," Sarah interrupted, her voice sickly sweet, "don't you want Jake to be proud? This dress is a statement. It says you're part of our family now." I felt the walls closing in. Where was Jake? He'd promised to be here, to support me. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Sorry, can't make it. Trust Mom and Sarah's judgment. Love you." I blinked back tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Later that evening, I confronted Jake at home. "You said you'd be there. This is our wedding, Jake, not your mother's." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, I'm sorry. Work's been crazy, but Mom and Sarah know what they're doing. They just want what's best for us." "What's best for us? Or what's best for them?" I countered. Jake's eyes hardened. "Hey, that's not fair. They're family." "And what am I?" I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Days blurred together as wedding preparations spiraled out of control. Martha and Sarah steamrolled over every decision, from the venue to the menu. Jake remained frustratingly passive, always siding with his family. One afternoon, I escaped to my parents' house, seeking solace. I found Dad in his favorite armchair, looking more frail than I remembered. "What's wrong, Pumpkin?" he asked, patting the seat beside him. I collapsed next to him, the dam finally breaking. Through tears, I poured out everything, the dress, the plans, Jake's indifference. Dad listened, his face growing stormy. "This isn't right, Claire. A marriage is about two people, not an entire clan." Mom brought us tea, her worry evident. "Have you talked to Jake about how you feel?" I nodded miserably. "He just doesn't see it, or doesn't want to." Dad squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to consider." A coughing fit interrupted him, violent and prolonged. Mom rushed to his side, fear etched on her face. "I'm fine," Dad wheezed, waving us off. But the pallor of his skin told a different story. That night, I returned home to find Jake, Martha, and Sarah huddled over seating charts in our living room. "There you are," Martha exclaimed. "We've decided to invite the Johnsons. I know you wanted a small wedding, but they're such good family friends." Something in me snapped. "No," I said firmly. The room fell silent. Jake looked up, startled. "What?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger. "This is our wedding, Jake, ours, not your mother's, not Sarah's. And I'm done letting them run roughshod over everything I want." Martha gasped. Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. Jake stood, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Claire, what's gotten into you? They're just trying to help." I met his gaze, a cold realization settling in my chest. "If you can't see what's happening here, Jake, then maybe we need to rethink this whole thing." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Martha and Sarah exchanged triumphant glances, thinking they'd won. But as I looked at Jake, seeing the conflict in his eyes, I knew this was far from over. Our wedding day loomed, and with it, a decision that would change everything. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stood before the mirror, encased in the gaudy dress Martha and Sarah had chosen, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Mom said. her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mom." A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Jake, looking handsome but troubled. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. Mom squeezed my hand and slipped out, leaving us alone. Jake's eyes roamed over me, taking in the dress. "You look different." "This isn't me, Jake," I whispered. "None of this is." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know things haven't been easy, but it's just one day. We can get through this." I felt a flicker of hope. "So you understand?" "I understand that my family can be a bit much sometimes," he said carefully. "But they mean well. Let's just get through today, okay?" My heart sank. He still didn't get it. The ceremony was a blur of faces and voices. I said my vows on autopilot, barely registering Jake's words. As we walked back down the aisle, Martha's triumphant smile made my skin crawl. At the reception, I found myself cornered by Sarah near the cake table. "I hope you realize how lucky you are," she hissed, her smile never wavering. "Jake could have done so much better." I felt something snap inside me. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Then maybe he should have." Before Sarah could respond, I grabbed a handful of cake and smashed it into her face. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Jake appeared at my side, his face a mask of shock and anger. "Claire, what the hell?" I looked at him, then at the stunned faces of his family, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I turned and ran, ignoring the calls behind me. I found myself in the garden, gasping for air. Jake found me there, his tie askew and cake frosting on his sleeve. "What's going on with you?" he demanded. "You've embarrassed us all." "Us?" I echoed. "There is no us, Jake. There's you and your family, and then there's me, alone." His face softened. "That's not true. I love you." "Do you? Do you?" I challenged. "Because loving someone means standing up for them, supporting their choices. When was the last time you did that for me?" Jake's silence was deafening. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly. "I won't live my life trying to please people who will never accept me." "What are you saying?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I slipped off my wedding ring and pressed it into his palm. "I'm saying goodbye." The shock on his face almost made me waver, but I steeled myself and walked away. As I reached the garden gate, I heard Martha's shrill voice. "Jake, what happened? Where is she going?" I didn't stay to hear his response. I kicked off my heels and ran, my ridiculous dress billowing behind me like a parachute of broken dreams. Hours later, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought I'd left behind. Mom brought me tea, her face etched with concern. "What happens now?" she asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe." A commotion downstairs made us both start. Dad's voice, usually so weak lately, boomed through the house. "You have no right to be here. Get out!" Mom and I rushed downstairs to find Jake standing in our living room, looking lost and angry. Dad stood before him, trembling with fury. "Please," Jake pleaded, his eyes finding mine. "Claire, we need to talk." I stepped forward, placing myself between Jake and my father. "No, Jake, we don't. It's over." As I ushered him out, I caught a glimpse of a car idling at the curb. Martha sat in the driver's seat, her eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. I closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the day crashed over me. This was just the beginning, I realized. The real battle was yet to come. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing as I saw Mom's name on the screen. "Claire, it's your father." Mom's voice trembled. "He's had a stroke. We're at the hospital." I was out the door in minutes, my mind a whirlwind of fear and worry. As I sped through the empty streets, I realized I hadn't even told Jake where I was going. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I searched for Dad's room. I found Mom slumped in a chair outside, her face pale and drawn. "How is he?" I asked, breathless. She shook her head, tears welling up. "It's bad, Claire. The doctors, they're not sure he'll make it through the night." My world tilted on its axis. I steadied myself against the wall, trying to process the news. "Can I see him?" Mom nodded, squeezing my hand as I entered the room. Dad lay still, tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. He looked so small, so fragile. I took his hand, willing him to open his eyes. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Days blurred together as we kept vigil by Dad's bedside. Jake called several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that my world was falling apart, while he was busy planning Christmas with his family. On the 5th day, as I was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair, I felt a slight pressure on my hand. I opened my eyes to find Dad looking at me, his gaze weak but aware. "Pumpkin," he rasped. Tears streamed down my face as I called for the nurse. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was hope. As December crept closer, Dad's condition improved enough for him to come home. I threw myself into caring for him, grateful for every moment we had together. One evening, as I was helping Dad with his physical therapy exercises, Jake showed up unannounced. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, his face a mix of concern and frustration. "You've been ignoring my calls. Christmas is in 2 weeks, and we haven't even discussed our plans." I stared at him, incredulous. "Plans? Jake, my father almost died. He needs me here." Jake's expression hardened. "I understand that, but my family is expecting us. We can't just cancel Christmas." "I'm not canceling Christmas," I said, my voice rising. "I'm spending it with my parents. Here." "But what about my family?" Jake demanded. "They're your family too now." I felt something snap inside me. Are they? Because when my father was fighting for his life, where were they? Where were you? Jake flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair. I tried to be here, but work." "Save it," I interrupted. "I've made my decision. I'm staying here for Christmas. You're welcome to join us, but I won't be going to your parents' house." Jake's face clouded with anger. "You can't just make that decision without me. We're married, Claire. We're supposed to be a team." "Are we?" I challenged. "Because lately, it feels like you're on a different team altogether." We stared at each other, the gulf between us widening with every passing second. Finally, Jake turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Dad's voice, weak but determined, broke the silence. "You did the right thing, Pumpkin. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I sank into the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. "I know, Dad, but why does doing the right thing have to hurt so much?" He squeezed my hand. "Because it's worth it. You're worth it." As I sat there holding my father's hand, I realized I was at a crossroads. The life I had built with Jake was crumbling, but something new and uncertain was taking shape. Christmas loomed ahead, not as a celebration, but as a battle line drawn in the sand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't back down. Not this time. The call came at 3 a.m., shattering the fragile peace I'd managed to find. Mom's voice, broken and raw, told me what I'd been dreading for weeks. "Claire, he's gone. Your father, he's gone." The world tilted on its axis as I fumbled for my clothes, my mind a whirlwind of grief and disbelief. I didn't even think to wake Jake as I rushed out the door. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. Mom sat in Dad's favorite armchair, clutching his sweater to her chest. I knelt beside her, words failing me as we clung to each other, our shared sorrow a tangible thing between us. As dawn broke, reality set in. There were calls to make, arrangements to handle. I moved through the tasks mechanically, each one a painful reminder of Dad's absence. It wasn't until late afternoon that I remembered to call Jake. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice hollow as I explained what had happened. Hours passed with no response. As evening fell, I tried again, only to be met with Martha's shrill voice. "Oh, Claire," she said, false sympathy dripping from every word. "Jake told us about your father. Such a shame. But you understand we can't change our plans for the charity gala tomorrow night, don't you? It's been in the works for months." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Martha, my father just died. Surely Jake." "Jake knows his responsibilities," she interrupted. "I'm sure your mother can handle the details. Family obligations come first, after all." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, rage and disbelief warring within me. Mom found me like that, still frozen in shock. "Claire? What is it?" I told her about the call, watching as her face crumpled in pain and anger. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The next day passed in a blur of funeral preparations and well-wishers. Jake remained conspicuously absent, his silence a deafening roar in the quiet moments. It wasn't until the evening of the wake that he finally showed up, looking uncomfortable in a suit that screamed charity gala rather than grieving family. "Claire," he started, reaching for me. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to be here sooner, but—" I stepped back, out of his reach. "But what, Jake? Your mother's gala was more important than being here for me? For my family? He had the grace to look ashamed. It's not like that. You know how important these events are. I couldn't just... Couldn't what? I interrupted, my voice rising. Couldn't be a husband? Couldn't support your wife when she needed you most? Jake's face hardened. That's not fair. I'm here now, aren't I? Now? I laughed bitterly. Now is too late, Jake. Where were you when I was making funeral arrangements? When I was holding my mother as she cried herself to sleep? Where were you when I needed you? A hush fell over the room as people turned to stare. Jake shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. Claire, please, let's not do this here. Why not? I challenged. Are you afraid people might see who you really are? A man who abandons his wife in her darkest hour for a party? Jake's eyes flashed with anger. That's enough. I won't stand here and be insulted. I'm leaving. As he turned to go, I felt something inside me break. If you walk out that door, I said, my voice deadly calm, don't bother coming back. He paused for a moment, conflict clear on his face. Then, without a word, he left. I stood there, surrounded by sympathetic murmurs and pitying glances, feeling more alone than ever. Mom appeared at my side, her hand warm in mine. You did the right thing, sweetheart, she whispered. As I looked around the room at the faces of those who truly cared, who had shown up when it mattered most, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. Dad was gone, and with him, the last threads of my marriage were unraveling. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do next. It was time to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. The house felt empty as I returned from Dad's funeral, my grief a heavy blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Mom had decided to stay with her sister for a few days, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the echoing silence of our family home. I fumbled with my keys, pushing open the front door only to freeze at the sight before me. A thick manila envelope sat on the entryway table, Jake's neat handwriting stark against the brown paper. With trembling hands, I tore it open, my heart pounding as I scanned the contents. Jake wanted a divorce. The world tilted sideways as I stumbled to the couch, the papers clutched to my chest. How could he do this now, when the wound of losing Dad was still so raw? My phone buzzed incessantly, Jake's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, unable to face his voice. Instead, I listened to the message he left, his words washing over me like ice water. Claire, I'm sorry it had to be this way, but after everything that's happened, I think we both know this is for the best. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing our assets. Dividing our assets. The phrase echoed in my head, and suddenly a terrible realization dawned on me. Dad's inheritance. Jake's family had always been oddly interested in my parents' finances. Could this be why? Panic rising in my throat, I called my mother's lawyer, Robert. I need your help, I said, my voice shaking. I think Jake and his family might be after Dad's money. Robert's voice was calm, steadying. Claire, breathe. We'll figure this out. Come to my office first thing tomorrow. The night passed in a blur of anxiety and sleeplessness. By dawn, I was at Robert's office, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline. I've reviewed the documents, Robert said, his face grim. It seems Jake is indeed trying to claim a portion of your father's estate as marital property. But don't worry, we can fight this. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. What do I need to do? First, we need to secure your assets. I'll file a temporary restraining order to prevent Jake from accessing any joint accounts. Then we'll prepare our counterpetition. As I left Robert's office, a plan forming in my mind, I spotted a familiar car parked across the street. Sarah, Jake's sister, sat behind the wheel, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. I marched over, anger fueling my steps. Enjoying the show, Sarah? Did Jake send you to spy on me? She smirked, not even bothering to deny it. Oh, Claire, you should have known better than to think you could take on our family. Jake's told us everything about your father's money. We won't let you keep it all to yourself. Her words confirmed my worst fears, but instead of crushing me, they ignited a fire in my chest. Watch me, I hissed, turning on my heel. Back at home, I began packing, throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. I couldn't stay here, not with Jake's family watching my every move. As I zipped up the bag, my phone rang. Mom's voice was frantic on the other end. Claire, someone broke into the house. They've ransacked your father's study. My blood ran cold. Mom, are you okay? Did you call the police? Yes, they're on their way. But Claire, your father's safe. It's empty. The safe, where Dad kept all his important documents, including his will. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Jake's family wasn't just after the money. They were trying to erase any evidence of Dad's true wishes. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, with my father's legacy under threat, I made a decision. I wouldn't just fight back. I would scorched earth this situation. Jake, Martha, Sarah, they had no idea what they'd unleashed. As I grabbed my keys, ready to race to my mother's side, a steely resolve settled in my bones. This was war, and I intended to win. The doorbell's shrill ring pierced the tense silence of Mom's living room. I exchanged a wary glance with her before approaching the door, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw Martha and Sarah, their faces masks of false concern. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. What do you want? Martha's saccharine smile made my skin crawl. Oh, Claire, darling, we've been so worried about you. I stood my ground, blocking their entry. Save it. I know what you're really after. Sarah's eyes narrowed. We just want to talk, Claire. Can't we come in? No, I said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Martha's smile faltered. Very well. Just that we've come to discuss your father's estate. Jake tells us there might be some complications. I felt a surge of anger. Complications? You mean your attempt to steal what rightfully belongs to my mother and me? Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and threatening. Be careful, Claire. You don't want to make an enemy of us. Too late, I spat. Now get off my property before I call the police. As they retreated, Martha called over her shoulder. This isn't over, dear. We'll see you in court. I slammed the door, my hands shaking. Mom appeared at my side, her face pale. What are we going to do, Claire? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Robert, my lawyer. Claire, we've got a problem. Jake's family is contesting the will. They're claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made his last revision. My blood ran cold. That's ridiculous. Dad was perfectly lucid until the end. I know, Robert sighed, but they've somehow gotten hold of medical records suggesting otherwise. We need to move fast. As I hung up, a terrible thought struck me. The break-in at Dad's study, they must have found something there. I turned to Mom, determination stealing my voice. We're not going down without a fight. I need you to tell me everything you remember about Dad's last days. Every conversation, every decision. For hours, we pored over documents, piecing together a timeline. As night fell, a knock at the door made us both jump. To my shock, it was Thomas, Jake's father. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. Claire, I need to talk to you. It's important. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He collapsed into a chair. His shoulders slumped. I can't do this anymore. Martha and Sarah, they've gone too far. Hope flared in my chest. What do you mean? Thomas took a shaky breath. They forged those medical records. Your father was never evaluated for dementia. It's all a lie. My mind raced. This could change everything. Thomas, would you be willing to testify to this? He nodded, looking years older. Yes, it's time I stood up to them. As Thomas left, promising to meet with my lawyer the next day, I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. My phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Hello? Jake's voice, cold and unfamiliar, filled my ear. I hope you're happy, Claire. You've turned my own father against us. Jake, this has to stop. You know what your mother and sister are doing is wrong. He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. Wrong? The only thing wrong here is you thinking you can win. We've got resources you can't imagine. Yeah, by the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you have a penny to your name. The line went dead, leaving me shaken. I turned to find Mom watching me, her face a mix of fear and resolve. What now? She asked softly. I squared my shoulders, a plan already forming in my mind. Now, we fight fire with fire. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. As I dialed Robert's number, ready to set our counterattack in motion, I realized this was more than just a battle over Dad's inheritance. It was a war for justice, for family, for everything I held dear, and I was ready to risk it all to win. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving Mom and me standing in front of our new home. A fresh start, miles away from the chaos Jake's family had brought into our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Ready? Mom asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. More than ready. As we unpacked, my phone buzzed incessantly. Jake, Martha, Sarah, all leaving increasingly frantic messages. I ignored them, focusing on creating our new sanctuary. It was past midnight when a crash downstairs jolted me awake. Mom's frightened voice called out, "Claire!" Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I'd kept by my bed and crept downstairs. The sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. Martha, Sarah, and Thomas stood in our living room, surrounded by shattered glass from the window they'd broken. Thomas looked terrified, but Martha's eyes gleamed with manic determination. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where's Milton's will?" I raised the bat, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "Get out of our house. Now." Sarah lunged forward, but I swung the bat, stopping inches from her face. She stumbled back, shock replacing her usual smirk. "Claire," Thomas pleaded, "this has gone too far. Let's just talk." "Shut up!" Martha snapped. She turned to me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little bitch, after everything we've done for you." A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Mom appeared beside me, her phone in hand. "I've called the police," she announced, her voice stronger than I'd heard in months. Panic flashed across their faces. Thomas made a dash for the broken window, but tripped, crashing into a side table. Martha and Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing and continuing their search. The choice was made for them as red and blue lights flooded the room. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" As the officers burst in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment when all the lies, all the manipulation would finally come to light. Hours later, as dawn broke, I sat in our kitchen nursing a cup of coffee. The police had taken Martha, Sarah, and Thomas away in handcuffs, charged with breaking and entering, attempted theft, and a host of other crimes. Jake had shown up shortly after, wild-eyed and frantic, but instead of defending his family, he'd crumbled under questioning, admitting to his part in the scheme to steal Dad's inheritance. "Claire?" Mom's soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "The detective wants to speak with us again." I nodded, standing up. "Let's finish this." In the living room, Detective Harris smiled warmly. "Mrs. Edith, Miss Claire, I have good news. With Thomas's confession and the evidence we found at the scene, we have more than enough to ensure Martha, Sarah, and Jake face justice." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. "What happens now?" "They'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law," he assured us. "And as for you two, you're free to live your lives without fear of further harassment." As the detective left, Mom and I stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling around us. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Mom said, her eyes glistening. "Your father would be too." I felt tears welling up. "I just wish he was here to see it." She pulled me into a hug. "He is, sweetheart. In every brave decision you've made, in every moment you've stood up for what's right, he's here." As we held each other, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. We'd face the storm and come out stronger, our bond unbreakable. Later, as I stood on our new porch watching the sun set on this chapter of our lives, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. No more sacrificing my happiness for others. No more letting anyone dictate my worth. I was Claire, daughter, fighter, survivor. And this was my story. On my terms. As I turned to go inside to the warmth of the home we'd created, I smiled. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it held.